Support comes from Mosby Building Arts, a residential remodeling company guided by discipline, preparation, and attention to detail. Call Mosby.com.
This is St. Louis on the Air from St. Louis Public Radio. I'm Elaine Cha. Community radio station 88.1 KDHX was a much-loved partner in St. Louis's music scene, a place where musicians went to share their work and listeners tuned in to hear eclectic sounds and learn about live events. But not everyone received a warm welcome at KDHX, and its evolution from funky South City mainstay to Grand Center Arts Institution was rough. The station endured years of budget cuts and public complaints about racism and sexual harassment in 2019. Complaints station leaders dismissed after a law firm conducted 2 days of interviews. When another group of DJs called for new leaders 4 years later, those leaders kicked them off the air and explained the purge as part of KDHX's commitment to diversity. Now, St. Louis Public Radio's Jeremy Goodwin concludes our 2-part special report, KDHX, How a Radio Station Unraveled.
No, you let me know they might.
Just off Benton Park in South St. Louis, the owners of Spine Indie Bookstore and Cafe hosted a festival right next to the little yellow house they sold coffee and books out of.
I want to remind you once again, the Save KDHX tent right over there next to the beer tent. They've got buttons. They've got free stickers. They will hook you up with all of your Save KDHX needs. Come on, keep your hands together for Soul City Oregon Trio!
The event was called SOS, Save Our Station. It was a month after the so-called Friday Massacre, when 22 DJs were taken off the air. A robust crowd turned up for 9 hours of bands and artsy vendors. Yard signs and buttons debuted a new rallying cry in red letters over a white background: Save KDHX.
Today is about saving KDHX, just like this button says.
That's newly fired DJ Hound Dog Brown.
Let's make KDHX cool again.
What will that take?
That would take a change in management and board and bringing back a bunch of highly talented programmers.
Former DJ Dre Stein was unmissable. She wore a flashing sign around her torso that proclaimed, Save KDHX. So what's the SOS Festival all about?
Bring the community together to show support for KDHX, for all the fired DJs, all the DJs that have been out on strike to support us, and just to show the community that we still care and they still care about us, and we raised some money to help pay for some lawyers.
In the aftermath of the DJ firings, about 100 of the station's associate members, that's DJs plus folks who help out in other ways, they met at KDHX for their first in-person gathering since the pandemic. It had the happy vibe of a reunion, but they were there to do business. Members would vote to add 3 people to the board and take 2 people off it. As things got started, board president Gary Pearson stood in the back of the room and raised his hand. He started reading a statement declaring the meeting unlawful and the vote invalid. The meeting leader cut him off. Pearson left. The next morning, I asked about his exit. Why not stay and hear what they had to say?
I didn't feel like it was at all appropriate, the things that they were discussing, and I didn't see a reason to sanction that. I would have loved to have a dialogue. As you notice, I was cut off as soon as I tried to speak.
The 3 people elected that night would have a long journey toward their board seats. We'll return to that. Meanwhile, the fired DJs and their supporters started a nonprofit, Love of KDHX. That's the League of Volunteer Enthusiasts. It was a sort of shadow cabinet, collecting money for a world after the tenure of embattled Executive Director Kelly Wells and Board President Gary Pearson. Love of KDHX staged regular protests in front of the station.
I was wondering when people would get people honking. Now it's happening.
At this one, Walter Voles was hanging a banner. He used to co-host Bluegrass Breakdown. Voles told me about the protesters' growing nest egg.
The League of Volunteers does have some funds that we have raised that a lot of the donors that used to donate to KDHX have sent our way, and that money will be put back into the station if we regain control. Otherwise, it will go to another probably nonprofit radio station.
How much have you gathered?
Somewhere near 100,000.
And those are people who may have been giving to KDHX but were turned off because of what's happening?
Exactly.
Love of KDHX collected more than $500,000 over the next 2 years. That's money the radio station really could have used. KDHX held increasingly frequent fund drives with diminishing returns. In 2018, the station reported $1.3 million in donations and grants. That's the year before public charges of racism and other offenses. 6 years later, that donation total had dropped 52%. And for DJs who were skeptical of station leaders but stuck around through this period, things got tense.
People used to joke that the studio was bugged. That's how weird this got.
That's Rob Levy. He's a 30-year KDHX veteran. He says he had to watch what he said around the building because he was worried about being identified as a critic of Wells and Pearson.
This got so out of hand that, the mood got, that bad. And the people well, don't say anything because the rooms are probably fine. I'm like, it should not be that bad. This is a friggin' community radio station, right? These problems should not be, even existing. It was just so incredibly stressful.
Levy's concerns were well-founded. Longtime listener Courtney Dowdle says station leaders grilled her for information.
They really wanted to know who was involved in Love of KDHX. They really wanted me to name names. And there were folks who were still on the air with KDHX at the time who did not want their involvement with Love of KDHX to be known because fear of retaliation, which was absolutely valid concern.
The board's dealings grew more opaque. No questions allowed. Nothing of substance in the minutes. Well, if the board was sealing itself off, longtime station supporters banded together.
There once was a station built by you and me, working together so the music could be free.
Yes, the battle for control of KDHX got its own sing-along protest anthem, courtesy of St. Louis artists The Mighty Pines with the Funky Butt Brass Band.
We all love music and we all love to sing. All those volunteers have so much to bring. They've given their lives, they've given everything. So please don't throw it all away. There's gotta be a better way. Oh hey, KDHX, I got something to say. Bring back Andy Coco and bring back Dre. I love the station with all of my heart. So don't let it fall apart and don't break my heart.
When DJs host shows for decades, they can build a remarkable relationship with listeners. But that also means big chunks of airtime are cordoned off by velvet ropes. KDHX leaders repopulated the show schedule with people who didn't have access before, including many black DJs and other people of color. The new look KDHX featured fewer highly specific microgenres from around the world and more hip-hop.
You do not want to miss what's coming up next. It is the world premiere of Classic Cuts with DJ Cut. It's a new show coming on in about 3-4 minutes. Should be funky, should be fresh. Again, you don't want to miss it. But I gotta
DJ Cut arrived, writing a no-doubt banger that name-checks the station.
Keep your dial tune to 88.1 KDHX. The turntable knocking, DJ Cut is in the mix. Cut classics, fantastic. He'll get you through the traffic when it's drastic. DJ Cut hands on fire from the wheels of steel. Don't try to chill. Cut classes getting ill. Keep your head bobbing from the jams that he's dropping. Keep your speakers rocking. Keep the people jocking. Keep your ears tuned. Listen up real close. DJ Cut classics, giving all the smoke.
Cut is one of St. Louis's most loved and most accomplished radio hosts and hip-hop DJs. He was a longtime voice of 95.5 The Loop.
That's right. You got it right. 88.1 KDHX. DJ Cut. back on these St. Louis airwaves. I'm going to call today's show and the rest of the shows that I'm doing Unrestricted Radio. But it's Cuts Classic. Don't get it twisted. But it just feels good to touch these airwaves again. And this show would not
6 months after the mass firing and resignations and protests, the station said 65% of DJs were from what it called historically underrepresented backgrounds, and that total was up from just 23% a year before. A listener could tell 88.1 reflected more of Black St. Louis than it had before. Yet among all the DJs given access to the airwaves after the so-called Friday massacre, none of them would get to enjoy that airtime for long. KDHX members who felt frozen out of the station's decision-making studied the bylaws for ways to claw their way in. To get a sense of how that went, it helps to take a good look at the KDHX journey of Courtney Dowdle, PhD in comparative sociology and one-time show reviewer for KDHX.org. Dowdle grew up listening to the station.
Sitting in my room listening to Gabriel's Tin Pan Alley in the wee hours, playing gospel music and blues and scratchy old records, and he just had such a personality. I first became a donor when I was around 15 years old. I had just started working as a busser at a restaurant and had tip money burning a hole in my pocket. I was like, this is what I'm going to do with it.
Years later, she gave feedback during the strategic plan process and stood for board election at that contested members meeting weeks after 22 DJs were fired. At that meeting, members voted for Dowdle, ex-station staffer Darian Wigfall, and Kip Louie to go to the board. Louie is a musician and special ed teacher. Courtney Dowdle was optimistic about what she could do with a board seat.
So my hope was that if I can sit at the table and talk to these folks, like seriously, honestly, genuinely putting the best interests of this organization, of the station, at the center of things, surely we can all agree that if that is our primary concern, is how to save the station. I honestly thought that they weren't aware of how much concern there was in the community.
The three would-be board members sued for their seats in St. Louis Circuit Court. In August 2024, the sides settled. Wigfall was out, but KDHX would seat Dowdle and Louie. Then the board canceled its next meeting. And another surprise.
We had an email that we had 4 new board members to welcome at this orientation, and 2 were Lady Jock and Gee Whiz.
They were 2 well-respected black DJs at the station. Gee Whiz has been called the grandpops of hip-hop.
I'm not sure how all of a sudden 2 additional board members were placed, but they were DJs, which the bylaws had been changed to prevent DJs from being on the board. How did we get here?
So you go through these months of litigation to get the 2 of you seated per the meeting the previous fall. You get there and the board says, oh, by the way, we're also appointing these 2 other people.
Yes.
That we selected. There was no vote.
I have no idea if there was a process.
So the 4 new members showed up for onboarding.
It started off very hostile, telling Kip and me that they had trust issues with us. They wouldn't be sharing information with us until we had proven ourselves to be trustworthy, and that we needed to stop talking on social media about things going on at the station.
Dowdle's eyebrows raised when Kelly Wells informed her that she wasn't allowed to talk to KDHX employees or volunteers. She'd have to go through Wells. That's because of the power imbalance between board members and the others, Wells said. Dowdle promptly disregarded that. She got a troubling tip from someone at the station. They'd filed a complaint with OSHA. That's the federal agency charged with enforcing workplace safety standards. There was a perpetually leaky ceiling at the station, where now a dark, spongy substance grew. We've seen photos. Dowdle went to take a look.
The ceiling tiles are brown. The ceiling tiles are brown and missing. You can see up above, some of them had been taken out, and you could see water damage in multiple studios, in multiple offices. There's buckets on the floor, plastic tarps laid over equipment.
OSHA sent a letter to KDHX asking it to investigate the complaint and get back to them. 6 weeks later, OSHA hadn't gotten a response to the letter or 2 subsequent voicemails. That's according to an email the agency sent to Dowdle. She brought it up when she and Kip Louie finally got to attend their first board meeting. Louie took his best shot there.
And then I spelled it out. And that conclusion was that the station really needed new leadership. My address to the board was met with deafening silence. Not a single person responded.
So it was awkward. The public portion was awkward. And as soon as we went to executive session, because there were personnel issues to discuss, and the personnel issues were Kip and me, and Joan let us know very promptly that we were suspended and that we would be escorted out of the building. So there would be a review process to discuss if and how we could have our suspensions lifted. They would be in touch. And for now, Paul Dever and Ray escorted us to the elevator, on the elevator, to the front door, and out the front door.
We were then perp walked out of the building, which I'm sure was meant to embarrass and demean us.
And that was the end of that was the end of my board involvement.
Your board career.
My board career ended that day, yeah.
Kip Louie just quit the board. Dowdle wanted to make things work. In a meeting, she said Pearson reprimanded her for contacting OSHA for an update.
One of the conditions of me being permitted to participate on the board was to name the whistleblower who filed an OSHA complaint about the leaking roof and the health hazards that the mildew might pose for DJs. That is Gary's primary bone to pick with me.
KDHX declined to make any of its leaders available for interviews for this piece. Gary Pearson declined directly, and the station's PR firm declined on behalf of Kelly Wells and the rest of leadership. Then we sent written questions. They included, was the substance growing on the ceiling mold? Did you ever clean it up? Why the delay in responding to OSHA? The station's PR firm referred us to a months-old statement about the station's sale. Months after her board debut, Dowdle ran for a new term in a sanctioned election, and she won again. When Pearson gave her the news, it came with a PS. Her suspension was still intact.
That's St. Louis Public Radio's Jeremy Goodwin, and you're listening to our special report, KDHX, How a Radio Station Unraveled. If you missed part 1, check out the St. Louis on the Air podcast or visit stlpr.org/KDHX. We need to take a short break. We'll be back with more after this. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio.
The Gateway brings you the day's news each weekday from around the St. Louis region and the state capitals in Jefferson City.
Our schools are accredited. We don't need this bill.
And Springfield.
How many more years must pass before lawmakers see time is of the essence?
I'm Abby Larico. Join me each weekday for The Gateway on the STLPR app or wherever you get podcasts.
Welcome back. I'm Elaine Cha. Let's return now to the second part of our special report about the demise of KDHX. The community radio station once found at 88.1 on the FM dial faced a DJ revolt that became a public battle over discrimination and mismanagement as the station's donors defected in protest. St. Louis Public Radio's Jeremy Goodwin continues our story.
As KDHX staggered into 2025, its fundraising efforts were in tatters after years of public turmoil. In February, it had $7,000 in the bank. Its lawyer described it as 2 steps from bankruptcy. Some in-the-know KDHX fans feared its board would just settle the station's debts and go home by doing the unthinkable, selling the FCC license and going off the air. But on this crucial point, volunteers had leverage. The bylaws required separate votes by the board and the members to approve any sale, and importantly, it required a 2/3 majority, with at least 17 members voting. That math meant that, for once, power was in the hands of the volunteers. Here's ex-DJ Roy Caston.
The behavior of the board and the behavior of the executive director was aimed at one goal and one goal only: complete consolidation of power so that they could decide what to do with this precious community resource.
On the last day of January, KDHX dropped a bomb. It stopped all its live broadcasts. Now it was just old shows and playlists. In a statement, it said, "Several factors have contributed to this decision, including long-standing financial pressures, industry-wide challenges for public media, and a decline in financial support. Unfortunately, recent disparagement campaigns and senseless lawsuits have severely impacted fundraising." And KDHX had another surprise.
All of the remaining contributors, whether they were calendar producers or podcast producers or live show DJs or whatever, we all were fired at once by email.
That's Jean Ponzi. She hosted an environmental affairs talk show called Earthworms. Ponzi knew one way to win an election is to eliminate most of the voters.
According to our bylaws, one of the big things that the associates have capacity to decide on is sale of the frequency and the assets. So by firing all of the remaining, I think there were 110 or 130 or something remaining, including myself, that disenfranchised that governing class in one fell swoop.
KDHX argued in court that with no live broadcasts, it didn't need any volunteers. At a hastily staged protest outside the station, exiled DJ Hound Dog Brown broke it down.
On Wednesday of this week, we filed a suit to unseat the board. So 2 days later, on Friday, the board moves to unseat everyone. They basically went nuclear.
There was an annual meeting for members in February on Zoom, and two people got to talk, board members Gary Pearson and Paul Dever. Pearson talked briefly about the future.
What do we do next? We don't have any specific things that we can share, that we can talk about. We don't know what that is.
Here are some specific things he didn't share. The board was 2 weeks away from voting to sell the license, which it had been shopping around since the previous summer. In December, it had even signed a non-binding letter of agreement to sell, but decided to consider other offers. None of this was known to the public. None of this was discoverable by watching board meetings or reading board minutes. So how did KDHX finesse the process? Remember the bylaws said there have to be at least 17 voters to sell? Not anymore. The board killed that requirement in an unannounced change the day before it kicked out all the volunteers. Oh, okay, but there still have to be 2 votes, one by the board and one by the members. Well, in the hours before a judge renewed a lapsed order that had allowed 15 station members to keep their voting privileges, the board moved. The same group of people voted twice to sell KDHX's FCC license. First voting as the board, and the next day voting as the only remaining associate members. Actually, the members voting were the board plus one. One station member not on the board retained his membership status. That's Ryan Spearman. He's Kelly Wells' musical partner and husband. The secret decision to sell was a big step, but KDHX still needed a quick cash infusion, a buyer, and a bankruptcy court judge would need to seal any deal. The station declared bankruptcy in March. It had $2 million in debt. At a protest in front of the station, I saw former DJ Matty Dredd.
We're just trying to set up a little bit of a banner to show that we are still involved in resurrecting this station and turning it in the right direction. But I think that we'll get the community gathered to take back this station if possible. At this point, they've left it in a shambles.
The dissident group Love of KDHX recruited allies, folks from the business world, politics, the arts. They wanted to prove there was plenty of donor money out there to support KDHX, just not a station led by Pearson and Wells.
To date, Love has generated $550,000 worth of donations.
That's Linda Martinez. She's former head of economic development for Missouri and one of the people newly involved in the effort to save the station.
The momentum is what's really astonishing.
Board President Gary Pearson made clear who he thought was responsible for the evaporation of the station's bank account.
We weren't at a point where we were financially independent or, long-term stable, but we had the chance to be there. That was where we were 2 years ago. And that has been pretty much entirely undone by the last 2 years.
Put another way, if you take away the public outcry over the leadership of Gary Pearson and Kelly Wells, there would be no funding crisis. The station wouldn't be long-term stable, but it also wouldn't be on the auction block. Pearson's comments often lumped his critics together, all as mudslingers just hurting the station. This is a 2023 interview. He's speaking here about the volunteers.
Some of the people that you've threatened or that you're trying to remove from the board are also people that have received threats from people that support this.
Listen to that again.
Some of the people that you've threatened or that you're trying to remove from the board.
He seems to equate parliamentary maneuvers with physical threats and saw it all coming from the same people. So what informed Gary Pearson's posture toward critics? Some background. He's a lawyer who works in entertainment and intellectual property law. Pearson told me once that before KDHX, he wasn't used to reading about himself in the press, and he didn't seem too comfortable with it. We spoke on the phone a few times right around the time KDHX took those 22 DJs off the air. He mentioned hostile messages sent to the board and staff. This isn't why you got involved in a nonprofit radio station, right?
It sure isn't. I'm supposed to be the boring behind the scene part of the music world,
Right.
I'm not really. I spent more time talking. Well, just you, but still, it's more time talking to reporters than I ever have before. I'm usually sitting there listening to my clients have these interviews. So
yeah, I know. I get it. But if KDHX weren't as important as it is, you wouldn't have that responsibility. But you do.
That's right. That's right.
Back when Bluegrass Breakdown hosts surprised listeners with an emotional goodbye, they also spoke against the negativity they saw aimed at station leaders.
I don't like people threatening people. I don't like the nastiness. And it's not okay to show up at somebody's house and beat on their door. So if you're doing that, please stop.
We don't want a January 6th.
No. No kidding.
All right,
I almost said a cuss word.
Pearson talked about the hostility he perceived in his 2023 broadcast with Kelly Wells.
It's very hard for me to accept the idea that I cannot explain things to people in a way that makes none of them hate me.
And around the same time, to me.
There was mistreatment of a board member that has led to a recent resignation. It's been a difficult board to serve on recently.
Pearson and Wells said they thought about resigning in 2019.
And I remember saying to y'all, do I need to resign? Maybe the easiest thing is for me to resign.
I thought that too, for myself.
6 years of controversy later, resignations were the one thing critics demanded and the one thing that seemed to be just out of the question. The DJ Idel K.
The fix is simple, man. We can get back to what it used to be. It can. It's real simple. Those two have to go. Respectable thing to do will be to quit. Don't say another word. Those 2 words, I quit.
Even as fundraising nosedived from all the public turbulence aimed at Pearson and Wells, it wasn't clear they were willing to consider a future with different people in charge. Or at least not a KDHX with their fiercest critics in charge. Stephen Fitzpatrick Smith is owner of the St. Louis pub The Royale. He and John Parker of Parker's Table in Richmond Heights got 250 other business owners to sign a letter that criticized the station's leaders. Smith sat at the negotiating table with some of them. Did it appear to you from your dealings with the leadership there that their number one priority was keeping KDHX on the air?
Oh, no, not at all. No. In fact, looking back on it, I should have realized all their actions were leading towards liquidation. I think that they were actually there to liquidate the station. At a certain point, is your position more important than the community radio station remaining in public hands?
The bad blood between station leaders and their critics seems to have gotten in the way of multiple rescue efforts. KDHX was still just on the verge of bankruptcy when Love of KDHX offered a proposal. $100,000 in cash, a pledge for another $100,000 soon, and a reorganization plan calling for new leaders. The board refused to discuss it. Roy Caston showed me a text message he said came from board member Paul Dever. It says, "You have already had your opportunity to be part of the solution." A 2025 text message from Gary Pearson to a developer described critics of station leaders as Caston's goons. Well, here's Caston's view.
They were offered a number of off-ramps, and they rejected them because they didn't like the messenger. They were thrown multiple lifelines, and they criticized and complained about the color of the rope.
Another possible lifeline came the night before KDHX planned to accept a key loan from K-Love. That's a national chain of Christian music stations. The loan would make a sale to K-Love likely. Board members Gary Pearson and Joan Gray sat in the back room of a locksmith shop on Cherokee Street. Stephen Fitzpatrick Smith and fellow letter writer John Parker were there. So was Jason Deem, a developer who focuses on historic building rehabs. And former St. Louis Mayor Vince Schamel sat at the table as a neutral broker. Smith recalls the scene.
Gary Pearson asked for an apology immediately when we sat down.
It wasn't an auspicious opening. Jason Deem questioned the urgency with which KDHX moved to sell its license.
My whole point was this isn't a bankruptcy situation. Your assets well outweigh your liabilities. Arguably, if you're going to sell this thing for $6 million, anytime you have an asset an independent market has valued at $5 or $6 million, it should be pretty easy to get a loan for half that.
Deem said there's enough money in the community to put together a big enough loan. Let's do it. But first, KDHX needed money for immediate expenses. Smith says he, Parker, and Deem put up $50,000 each for a loan to be delivered the next morning before court.
I had to make a decision that night, which was pretty drastic for me, and that was to lend money that, I'm not a highly funded individual. It's I'm liquidating part of my retirement here. So there was an agreement that we do this loan, verbalized out in this meeting that we were all going to do it, and I was like, oh, Jesus, I have to scramble. I've never had to scramble to get money like this within hours.
Smith woke the next day thinking they'd struck a deal. Deem rose to an email from Pearson. It read in part, "Joan and I both woke up with a very strong sense of disappointment and disbelief at the way Steve and John acted and spoke last night. No acknowledgments, no apologies, no commitment to change anything on their part. All they care about is getting rid of Kelly Wells and doing Roy Caston's work for him. It's disgusting. Personally, I have no interest in being in debt to those individuals and think they should play no further role in this. A loan from them is insulting." Could the continued existence of a nearly 40-year-old public service come down in part to whether its board president felt insulted by the people offering to lend it money? Weeks before the meeting, Deem says Pearson sent him a statement that he would have to sign if he wanted KDHX to accept any loan he brokered. Stephen Fitzpatrick Smith just saw it recently.
When I actually saw this, I'm like, holy shit. It's like when you get a hot piece of something, you're like, ooh, Jesus.
Would you read the part that mentions you?
Sure. We condemn unequivocally the lawsuits by former volunteers, campaigns to divert donations by the entity known as the League of Volunteer Enthusiasts of KDHX, the boycotts and petitions promoted and circulated by Steve Smith and John Parker, and harassment and threats that the staff and board have endured. All these things have made financial challenges at KDHX worse and led directly to the current crisis.
Jason Deem says Pearson didn't just require his sign-off on the unequivocal condemnations. He also wanted former Mayor Schamel and new St. Louis Mayor Kara Spencer to add their John Hancocks. So, the station did say yes to that key loan from K-Love, and then it agreed to sell the broadcast license for up to $4.8 million, more than twice the station's debt. But then competing Missouri Christian station Joy FM entered the chat, and it won the KDHX asset auction with a bid of nearly $9 million. As the Save KDHX movement raced to raise more money,
The momentum is what's really astonishing.
KDHX pushed the judge to approve the sale quickly. It warned in court that the offer might go away if there were delays. Stephen Fitzpatrick Smith saw it as a race to sell the station before anybody could raise enough to save it.
We would try to talk to people like, oh, we'll talk to this board member, like maybe if we can just get through to them. No, they were hell-bent on destroying the radio station, to liquidating this asset, this community asset. It wasn't their asset, it's all of our assets.
Dozens of station supporters showed up in bankruptcy court to watch lawyers challenge the sale. In June 2025, a judge ruled. She said KDHX behaved appropriately and it struck a deal that supported the organization's mission, building community through media. The sale to Joy FM was approved. 88.1 on the dial would change from KDHX to Worship One. In an upbeat statement, KDHX said, "This is not the end, it is the beginning."
That's St. Louis Public Radio's Jeremy Goodwin, and you're listening to our special report, KDHX, How a Radio Station Unraveled. We'll conclude our 2-day dive into this story after a short break. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio.
If you have a smart speaker, you have access to the entire world of NPR and St. Louis Public Radio. All the latest news and all the captivating stories. Activate our voices with yours by telling your smart speaker to play St. Louis Public Radio.
Welcome back. I'm Elaine Cha. We now conclude our special report about the unraveling of KDHX, a much-beloved community radio station that for decades offered a mix of eclectic music on St. Louis's airwaves found nowhere else. Here's Jeremy Goodwin.
There's a word that comes up over and over in discussions about KDHX.
Get the community gathered.
Community asset.
Concern there was in the community.
Bring the community together.
They're hurting the community.
Serving the community.
Some of our community.
For the betterment of the St. Louis community.
But who exactly is in the community? KDHX leaders said they were broadening the answer to that question. 4 years earlier, some of those same leaders, Executive Director Kelly Wells and board members Gary Pearson, Paul Dever, Joan Bray, Ray Finney, and Frank Flotron, quickly dismissed charges of racism at KDHX.
There is a fine line between substantiation of racial discrimination and substantiation of the perception of racial discrimination.
So what was the station's culture like? One view comes from Edie Anderson, a veteran of black radio known on the air as DJ EDB.
I didn't get a welcoming vibe, let's put it that way.
She wanted to start a show on KDHX when it was still on Magnolia Avenue. She'd been thinking about changing careers, but only if she could DJ the jazz show she had always wanted, just for fun. She was invited to fill in for a KDHX DJ.
It was like asking me questions, like I was being interviewed or something, which kind of threw me off. And when I tried to explain to him, what I came there to do, it was like, no, you're not. Then the uncomfortable feeling and that something was not right.
Years later, Darian Wigfall, he's the black station staffer and DJ who found a defaced sign in the studio that said Black Lives Matter.
Kelly laughed and even said, "Oh, I bet I know who that was."
When Kelly Wells offered Wigfall his job, he talked about it with a black friend who'd done contract work for KDHX in the 90s.
She said, "Why do you want to work there?" Because when I worked with them, it was definitely racist. And I still was like, well, maybe it's different. Maybe it's different.
But repping the station in black spaces sounded great to Alonzo Townsend. He's the station staffer who says working at KDHX was one of the worst situations he's been in.
I got kissed on the lips by the ED at an event while I was working for KDHX.
Townsend remembers setting up a KDHX table at an event in a predominantly black neighborhood.
And me and Darian went to set up a table, and I remember a lady come up to us. She said, I didn't know no black people worked at KDHX. She said, I love KDHX. And I said, well, that's the mission.
So, 2019. Townsend says the Save KDHX crowd didn't back him up when he put his name on the line to call the station out.
We're talking about racial discrimination. We're talking about sexual harassment. Not even just me. All this about documented. All this went to the proper channels, and it didn't matter to people. They thought we were just coming up there to set fire to their favorite station, or just you got people that were dealing with some pretty rough situations in environments, work-wise. And you still didn't stand up and defend them and fight for them.
Saria Conaway, the black musician and producer who said she saw a toxic culture at KDHX, she compared public reaction to the 2019 accusations and the 2023 DJ firings. She wrote, "At the time, that's 2019, it felt that maybe the music community that I thought I was a part of didn't actually consider me to be a part of it. That was later affirmed when I saw the magnitude of the public outcry from Tom Ray's dismissal." Dissident DJ leader Roy Caston reflects on the decision in 2019 to organize covertly, gathering strength for a public fight in the future.
I think that we could have, at the very least, shown greater public solidarity with the individuals who had been, in their own words, harmed by Kelly Wells and her management.
Specifically the people who spoke about racism and harassment?
Yeah.
Do you sounds like you feel like you fell short in supporting them when they came out.
We did what we thought was the best that we could do.
But Alonzo Townsend says the moment to save KDHX was in 2019.
When it would have saved, say my word again, when it would have saved this station, it would be here right now in a whole different incarnation, but doing all the vibrant work that needs to be done. But show up for people. They would have showed up then and asked for change and asked for accountability, but they didn't. And now fast forward, we're talking about in a past tense because we can't get it back. And the people that deserve to be held to accountability, you let them off the hook.
I asked Darian Wigfall about it. Did you get the support from your white colleagues that you wanted to get?
Man, no. I mean, I do now. It's so... Social things are so interesting, right? As a black man coming from the outside in, it seems crazy to say, but I think a lot of white folks at the time that were fans or DJs or volunteers did not think KDHX was racist whatsoever. Because from their frame, there's a lot of white culture, but we have black people are represented. There's shows on that have black cultures and black music, so there's no way we can be racist. But I remember some of the first events that I went to that were specifically folk and Americana, and the vibe that I got from some of those older white folks was like, you might have been that lady screaming behind the girl in the picture from Little Rock.
How did that manifest at an event at the stage? Is that the kind of thing you're talking about?
Yeah, an event at the stage.
So now we're talking about the audience,
yeah,
it sounds like.
Yeah,
right?
So you just get looks, sort of like you should know your place kind of look. Not from everybody. I'm not going to say that it's a majority of the audience, but a few people in there I definitely got that vibe from. But white folks on the outside looking in would never even feel that because they didn't experience what I was going through. They just maybe heard me talk about the sign.
Wigfall has misgivings about the amount of support he received in 2019, but he has been working with the Love of KDHX crowd, and he joined their effort to launch an internet radio station. And EDB, the black DJ who had a bad experience there years ago, she started DJing at KDHX in about 2019.
I did the jazz show that I always wanted to do.
What did it mean to you to finally get to do that?
It meant, are you kidding? It meant everything to me. Not only did the show mean everything to me, the fact that KDHX gave me the opportunity to do the show. And what I loved about KDHX is the fact that you could play what you want to play, do what you want to do. You could express yourself.
I'm going to call today's show and the rest of the shows that I'm doing Unrestricted Radio.
So what lessons do folks draw from the demise of KDHX? Musician Saria Conaway wrote, Kelly Wells and the board used DEI initiatives out of convenience to distract and remove any dissenting voices. What about the pub-owning, letter-writing, loan-offering Stephen Fitzpatrick Smith?
If you have issues where DEI could have really stepped up and done something and then ignored them and then used that same language to silence your critics, to use that as a weapon to keep yourself in your own position, it's making a farce of what DEI is supposed to accomplish.
And as for Gary Pearson, well, he landed the plane, even if it was more of a crash landing. But KDHX paid its creditors. In its afterlife, the organization's DNA is now TBD. And that's news. KDHX argued in bankruptcy court that a key piece of the deal with Joy FM was access to an HD digital radio signal. You can listen to that online or with a special tuner. Kelly Wells testified that the surplus from the sale, more than $6 million, was enough to fund 6 years of digital broadcasting. The judge mentioned the HD signal twice in a ruling that said KDHX could still fulfill its mission without a broadcast license. But when KDHX announced in October it had ceased all operations, it promised only, quote, our next set of programs, and maybe not until 2027. We recently asked KDHX by email if it will use the HD signal it secured access to in the sale. We also asked, how much money is left? What are you going to do with it? And by the way, do you still employ Kelly Wells? Do you employ anybody? The station declined to comment, referring us a second time to a months-old statement about the sale. Here's what we know for sure. After selling the FCC license for nearly $9 million, the former KDHX now has in the bank some number of millions to do something at some time. And it may or may not still have an executive director named Kelly Wells. Exiled DJ Roy Caston takes a historical view.
I think that in the end, Gary Pearson, Paul Dever, and Joan Bray are going to go down in history, along with Stan Kroenke and Paul McKee, as some of the greatest betrayers of the trust of the community that St. Louis has ever seen. What they have done will not be forgiven.
Happy people are gathered on a Sunday afternoon in South St. Louis at the converted church now called Lindenwood Park Place. It's 1 year and 1 day since KDHX abruptly stopped broadcasting live radio and dismissed all its remaining volunteers. Love of KDHX is now Love of Community Radio STL, and in a few minutes it'll go live with its new internet station. In the tiny studio, some people with familiar voices are preparing.
We used to do the bluegrass breakdown on the other station.
Walter and Willa Voles gave their listeners a tearful goodbye when they quit their 25-year-old KDHX show to protest its leaders. Today, Willa says she may cry again, but for different reasons.
We're here to launch CRSTL, FM. We get to be the first show. Yay, what an honor. And we're so excited, and I hope my eyes don't start leaking.
When the clock strikes noon, Walter Voles hits a button on the studio console and leans toward the mic.
You're in tune to CRSTL.FM.
We're back!
We want to welcome all the folks in the St. Louis area, a new era in music for St. Louis.
On the other side of the studio door, as guests browse the potluck buffet, I noticed the gathering has a similar demographic to what I saw at a KDHX members meeting. The crowd looks to be largely, but not entirely, white, and it doesn't seem there's too many people here who aren't old enough to remember when KDHX launched in 1987. The DJ Ital K is all smiles.
What's happening today is a great day, a day that many people in St. Louis visioned would happen.
What are you going to play? What kind of stuff?
A little reggae, and more reggae, and a little overdose of reggae.
The former KDHX, which should have a surplus of more than $6 million after paying its debts, it says the earliest it may launch its next phase, whatever it may be, is late this year. The volunteers behind CRSTL.FM spent $28,000 getting the internet station on its feet. They want to get the station onto the radio someday. But for today, the mic is back on. We can all listen for what comes next.
Thanks for listening to our 2-day special report, KDHX, How a Radio Station Unraveled. STLPR's senior arts and culture reporter Jeremy Goodwin reported, produced, and did the sound design for this piece. Story editing by Alex Hoyer and Rob Edwards, with additional audio support from Alex.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. And leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thanks.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.